quality digital work, it dangles just beyond reach. Anyone know what he was talking about? Here is this great promise. The world is all before us if we get this right. Anyone guess? It was DRM. All he was saying is if we can have strong control over everybody's digital technology so nobody can pass a file of a movie or a book unless we know where it's going, then the movies will be happy to put their movies out on the net because they'll get money from everyone who does it. So that's the way to control our future. What we want to do is just tie everything up in technology so tightly that no one can steal a thing, and then the world will be a perfect place. We'll be talking about this again when we come to IP. I imagine it's not something that you all particularly agree with. So you get the other argument from someone like James Boyle, who says we've locked most of 20th century culture, that key word again, and done it in a particularly inefficient and senseless way. So he's saying that DRM is actually a disaster and destroying our culture, whereas Stefik was saying, oh, DRM, locking everything down, is actually perfect for our culture. Both of them sort of technological arguments, but in a way, as we noticed the other day, if we look at the ideas behind those attempts to lock up digital works, they're very much conditioned by laws, by Congress, by lobbies. It doesn't look as though you can really explain this in terms of technology alone. And that's one of the things to keep our eyes on, is that when someone tries to say, look, it's just a matter of technology, pause and think and say, well, technology is clearly important, but is that all that's going on here? Okay, so that's setting up then what technological determinism is and some points about it, and then you all read about it and wrote about it, and well done, they were interesting to read. And you took sides. And in fact, interestingly, this year, for the first time, I think, Williams won the arguments. We put this, or in fact, we changed Williams reading, we changed the Heilbronn reading at different times, but we always have a for or against. And this time, only about 20% were on Heilbronn's side. Looks as though technological determinism is weakening along here. And quite a lot thought that Williams was right in saying you cannot put it just in terms. And then quite a lot said, well, no, you can go either way. So let's perhaps hear a couple of voices. Elizabeth, are you here? Elizabeth? Don't read it all out if you would, but can you just give us a quick summary? And I should warn, in protection of the people who have to speak, I've actually cut some of what they wrote here, just to get to a particular aspect of their argument. But Elizabeth, your argument, you were a Williams fan. So stand up and tell us what Williams had going for him. No, you can do it sitting down. You don't, you bellow, but you're being recorded for posterity, so make sure it comes out. Mm-hmm.
And that even though his argument wasn't necessarily social constructionist, like neutrality, that he sort of summarized those two counter-arguments and found a conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so some nice points there in terms of doing the homework. I mean, nice to make a clear argument, to bring in something like social constructionism to say I can place this argument in a larger context. And the underlying argument is that Williams, in a sense, had a complex notion of the evolution of technology in society, rather than the simple idea that society sits down and technology comes along and kind of whacks it and it moves on, kind of punctuated equilibrium. And in fact, that was a point that was also brought up by Adam. Is Adam here? Adam? He's not here today. Poor Adam. Okay, well, then I can pass on fairly quickly in that he made a similar point, that it was an evolutionary point, again an evolutionary, and he blames now, rather than, as Elizabeth was saying that, well, Williams made some nice points, he goes the other way and says, no, look, Heilbronn really makes some bad mistakes. And in a fairly extendedly insulting way, he sort of accuses him of being a kind of bad at high school evolutionary biology. And then another thing worth doing, he throws in a couple of examples. He says, look, if we want to believe, the problem is that he thinks that technology is always improving, but look at the car. We had the electric car back in 1915, why don't we have it now? Which is an interesting question to bring up. Okay, so let's just bring up a couple of Williams arguments, keep them in mind, and let's go to the other side. And again, there were some that clustered together that I brought up. Michael, so yell it out for posterity and give the basic thought here. And I should be fair again, I'll get on to those who mix, but I kind of pulled out the stronger point.
So I think in Heilbronn's argument, when he's talking about how society changes, and that in some ways he talks about it being determined, but he also gives a lot of options for where it's not fully determined. He talks about different types of technologies emerging. I think that it's totally true with respect to modern China when he mentions that some technologies won't emerge because there's essentially no need for them to emerge. And in modern China today, with the way that factories are set up, you have no need for robots because labor is so cheap. And in the US in the car industry, that's where they're going because it's so much more efficient and effective than paying tens of people in the US.
Okay, so one important argument here, and nice bringing up again a case and an example, but one of the arguments he brings, he ties back into Heilbronn and Williams in a way, because this question of the social order is very much tied up into what labor looks like and how labor is organized. And he says, look, if you look at China, then you will see something very different. So again, hold that in mind. We had one more again on the labor force. Dao Yi, you here? Or am I pronouncing that right? Okay, so can you just again, you seem to me to be saying something similar, so. These are the people who got their assignments in so early that they can't remember now. Mm-hmm. So taking Facebook here as an example and saying that's a technology that can't be explained in terms of evolution. So we explain it in terms of Mark Zuckerberg's brilliance, or if we watched the movie because he had a tough time with that first girlfriend that he went out with. Is that more or less but it sort of comes out of an individual's head. Okay, so there's another, just to give you, I'll ask for some feedback in a moment, but just to go sort of round the cycle. Jay, Kim? Jay? Yeah, Jay? Okay, so you were willing to give both of them, as it were, it seemed to me, some credence, yeah? And partly in this notion of cycle. Can you just quickly sort of say what you felt that was? Just a little more than that, just try to clarify. What part, for instance, can you say, in each? Think how it feels for me, right? Talk for an hour and a half. No, I sympathize. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that in fact, take it how you wish, but it's a good and classic Marxist argument in a way. It is the argument of a sort of punctuated equilibrium. You have these big changes, and then you get a lot of small incremental ones, and society evolves, and then you get a big one again. And there's some of that, I think, in both Heilbronn and Raymond Williams. And I think it's something that we tend to like to think. Of course, it's a tricky thing for us now, because we can say, yeah, well, look, there's the printing press, and then nothing much happens, and then you get the telegraph, and then nothing much happens, and then you get, the telephone or the radio. But the trouble is, when we say things like, well, the internet changes things, well, it just seems a little like those generational shifts, that we just have one technology after another, each of which is credited with changing society. Is it Facebook, or was it Web 2.0, or was it the Mosaic browser? Each of these gets loaded with being that one technology, and all the others called incremental. And we have to make decisions about which one is. one thing that I said at the beginning of the class, by the way, is do remember to answer the question. And in this question, some of you missed the point that there was a second part. It said, who's better, Williams or Heilbronner? And it then also said, what do you think of their predictions, and how do those predictions back up your argument? Now, quite a few of you forgot to look at that. The predictions are slightly hard to find. They're buried in there. Many of you got them, but some didn't. But let me just look now, having looked at someone who's looked at a couple of predictions. Karen is here? Karen. Okay, so you actually took the second part and gave it some space, and you here, so give us a word.
Yeah, I said that, I don't know, said that the computer would be more scientific and luckily stand scientific, but it also has patients, and all sorts of spheres, that he really did.
Mm-hmm.
And television also has the whole one by social.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so he looked at both these things and gave us some idea of what they would produce. Heilbronner has this interesting thing, which I think only one person alluded to, and he says, look, we can look at the computer in two different societies. We can look at it as he could then, because Soviet Russia was still in place, Soviet Russia, and with a society with the Commissar, or we can look at it in the West society within the capitalist system. But we know that one thing will be true in both systems. I don't remember what he said that was. It's just one sentence at the very end. Society with, yes? The bureaucrat. And you told me, sorry? Sam, okay. Yeah, he says society with the bureaucrat. What the computer is giving us is a bureaucratic society, going back in some ways to Weber and the great picture of society long before the computer. We might just bear that in mind. Just one final one with predictions. Nicole, is Nicole here? Nicole, yeah. Okay, Nicole, you two look at predictions along with making a choice between Heilbronner. So, what do you have to say? Okay, so again, looking at this question of the centralizing of power, and Williams sees this as something as a contradiction, the centralizing of broadcast power with the privatizing of reception at the other end, that we all do it in our little world. Because in some ways, at times seem to be a better picture of the internet than television. I mean, arguments have been made, Wired put the argument out last year, that basically the web is dead, that as we go over to apps and a world of apps, it's a much more controlled experience. Although some people say, well, Facebook is really giving us independence, others say, no, it's not, it's concentrating everybody within one extraordinary corporate power. And equally as we look back, what's intriguing, even though he's had his comeuppance in the last year in some ways, with the scandal around him, is that large media conglomerates still are very strong and very powerful in surprising ways. So again, are we going to heaven or are we going the other way? We may have identified the technology, but we're not absolutely sure what it's telling us. I want to go back to just one thing very quickly that Jay talked about, and that is he said, Heilbronner recognizes, and for some cases, including the ones he states, are in fact determinately advancing in such a way that it's unlikely that the forward stage would have happened without the stage before. And that in a way is the essence of Heilbronner's argument. You can't have this without having that before it. The question is, in a way, how deterministic is that? And in fact, Heilbronner himself talks about his soft determinism. The question he asks is industrial technology the necessary and sufficient condition for capitalism? Okay, anybody willing to take on necessary and sufficient and tell us what the difference between the two are? Do we understand that distinction? Because in this area, it's a very important distinction. Well, here's the way in which I think Heilbronner is, I would say, that goes soft. One is to say, and this is the strongest version of determinism, and if you hear somebody argue this way, think of which of these they're about. One is to say, look, this machine simply produces that kind of society. That is, it's absolutely necessary that the world will change when this machine lands in its midst. And that's real hard determinism. Get this, and society cannot do anything but change. Now, there's a slightly different one that says, that's a necessary and sufficient condition, that it's sufficient to have this machine to change society. But there's a slightly weaker one that says, you couldn't have feudalism without the handmill. So it is a necessary condition, but, it doesn't say that if you have the handmill, you necessarily have feudalism. So it isn't a sufficient condition. He's weakening it here to say, well, look, rather than say anywhere the handmill turns up, you're going to get feudalism, let's say anywhere where you get feudalism, you'll have the handmill. It's a slightly different argument. And then there's the third one, which simply says that once the handmill is superseded by a new technology, the steam mill, then feudalism, which is deeply tied up in the handmill, is going to be in trouble. Now, just give some time to think about those, because those are three arguments which are all called technological determinism. But when we want to say Facebook changes the world, think a little bit about which of those three you're actually saying when you say that. Okay, so let's go to what your input. I thought was useful input. Anybody just now want to recant? Anybody want to change sides? Any further thoughts on? Yes, you are? Peter?
It seems like, well, a lot of our really good technology, a lot of our stuff was already available 10 years ago, and originally it wasn't. Like, what does that say?
Okay, now we actually we do meet that argument. Where? Yes. Yeah, William, sorry, you are? Sammy? Sammy, it's going to be easy. A lot of Sams, and I'll learn all your names easily. So Williams does make that argument. He says, look, one of the tricky things with this is that you put a technology down, and we actually see this all the time, and we say, look, this is how this technology is going to work. But in fact, it ends up being really successful in some other way that we didn't quite predict. And of course, the internet is a classic example of that. It was designed by techies in order to exchange research papers and to share computer time. Nobody really, we'll talk about this later, had much idea that people would go out to do shopping or betting or that Facebook would exist. When people were doing the file exchange FTP protocols and the TCP IP, they had, as Peter says, no real idea. They had lots of predictions about what this stuff would do, and we'll look at a few in a minute, but they weren't the ones that actually turned out to be the case. So another thing to bear in mind, this reminds us, with these predictions, is we can look at them in two different ways. One is we can look back and say, well, what were people saying? And the other is to ask ourselves, what are we saying now about what will happen in the future? Because there's two ways in which we make these arguments. One is to look historically and say, oh, look at the printing press, what it did. And the other is to say, look at this technology sitting in front of me now, I can tell you what it's going to do. And those are two rather different arguments. Okay, now I'm going to really rattle along because we've got time. So, this argument that a technology comes along and changes the culture irrevocably has a long, long history. We're going to be talking for the next couple of classes, Jeff will, about writing, and then we'll talk about manuscript culture, and we'll actually look at Plato in the Phaedrus, who says, in a famous argument, that the trouble with this thing, writing, which you've invented, is that it's going to destroy everybody's minds. People will never remember anything ever again. It will be a disaster. We don't want this nasty stuff called writing. And we'll consider that. Now, that seems like some idiotic ancient Greek going around saying this is the end of the world. Wasn't he a fool? Except that, there are tons of books coming out now saying exactly the same. Your brains are being rotted by this technology. You will never be able to have a sane argument again in exactly that form. So these things do stick with us. One of the things we see in this regard, then, is from the other side that we're all going direct to heaven, is long arguments that you get this new technology and education, and that's your world now in many ways, and mine too, is going to change irrevocably. And so in 1966, Patrick Supes, writing for Scientific American, with a lot of their great on predictions, said, one can predict in a few more years, millions of school children will have the personal services of a tutor as well informed as Aristotle. I don't know what that means, because in what way was Aristotle very well informed? Yes, he didn't know how to log into Facebook or how to tweet, so he's limited. But I kind of like the idea, because you've got me, and I can say, yeah, because now because of the tech, I'm as well informed as Aristotle. You should be so lucky. And again, you see grand arguments, as I said, in looking at Hugo and the artist. So here is D.W. Griffith, the great director, is children in the public schools will be taught practically everything by moving pictures. Certainly, they will never be obliged to read history again. Sadly for you in this course, that has not yet quite come true, so you're going to be obliged to read some history. But there's this kind of prediction. We can just transform the world. We've got something new in our place. Now again, well, this sort of looks like some guy back in 1915 talking off the top of his head. What did he know? Why did he think films were so important? But we only had to look in this week's newspapers to see exactly the same predictions coming again. There's Apple coming out with this new app and this new design for textbooks, and they're saying more or less as they have for a while, this machine is simply going to change the way that education is done. We don't need anything like this anymore, and the world will be a better place without them. What, of course, they didn't quite take into account is people have been studying this for ages, and where they've followed in serious studies with the Kindle trying to replace readers and textbooks, it actually proved to be pretty lousy. Now, Apple may be able to do better than that, but there are reasons, I'm not going to go into them now, why, A, on the one hand, those claims are being made all the time. The reason that many people will tell you that you have a revolution in technology is they're basically saying, sell the car in your garage and buy a new one from the shop down the road. We're always trying to say, this new technology is the one that's going to change the future. Get on board, because you'll be left behind if you don't. So, there's a long cycle of these going back to Plato, but coming up to yesterday's newspaper, that we're going to change the world, particularly the world of education. So, let's do a little bit then at looking at people like us sitting in the middle of change and making a prediction. So that's slightly different from a couple of standard ones where we get Francis Bacon, who looked back at printing and saying, look, printing just changed the world. It may change it so much that no empire, no sect, no star seems to have exerted greater power than these mechanical devices. There's real technological change. It's nothing to do with politics. It's nothing to do with fate. It's all to do with this machine. And in the 19th century, people were still making the same argument. Here is Carlyle yet again, that he who first shortened the labor of populace by movable type was disbanding armies, cashiering kings, creating new democratic world. He had invented the art of printing. And we will look at these questions when we look at print. But what I want to bring out now is that style where you look back. What's trickier and more brave in a way is to look at something around you and say, this thing is going to change the world, and I will tell you how. So here's someone saying at the bottom this invention might suffice, and this sounds like Carlyle, to make possible the establishment of democracy among a large population. No reason why it wouldn't be possible for all the citizens of France to communicate their will in such a way that communication might be considered instantaneous. Anyone want to guess when and what he was talking about? Well, he was talking about what was known as the line of sight telegraph, which was this weird device sort of like smoke signals, but now it was made on the top of a building with sticks that pointed in different directions, and you could have a series of towers and transfer messages from one to another. And he was talking about them in 1795, and we will, when we talk about the telegraph, we'll talk very much about these. But you get something like this, and you make this prediction that, with this thing, France will be a single small community. No problem. And here, for those who are really good at French, is actually this is transcribed from a brevet from a patent declaration that was made, that got out of the French Patent Office. And what he says is in similar tone, after a lot of work, a new technology that was regarded as impossible by all the scientists of my time. It's a new route, and so you can establish a patent for it if it is new, in which distance will disappear. And the extremities of the world, so here again we sound like Facebook, everybody will be in touch with everybody else. Anyone want to guess what he was talking about? The patent was accepted. He was talking about the balloon, and he was writing balloon flight. So, or we might look again, and it's being desperately unkind to people, but it just does remind us to be cautious in some of our predictions. This is Scientific American, the progress of human knowledge, century of revolutions, the character and conditions of the human race have now been transformed. No age illustrated so strongly the empire of mind over matter, the ability of man to rise, a happy privilege we enjoy of living in an age. Its improvement of intelligence and virtue stands without a rival in the history of the world. And what was he talking about? The final line is, look at our splendid steamboats. So there we are. You just need a steamboat. Now, in fact, when steamboat came along, Fulton steamboat was a nightmare. They kept blowing up. People didn't want to travel on them. But you can say, well, look at these. We can move really fast down the river now. That's going to change everything. And so you make these grand predictions because we tend to probe them. Or we get in a very grand form, as this is actually the first train in America, I think, the Selbridge Lion. And so again, this looks pretty groovy. We've only been able to move at the speed of a horse. Now something's going to go along and go, well, maybe a little faster than a horse for a while, but not much. Objects of exalted power and grandeur elevate the mind that seriously